excerpt was taken from a full and bloom interview with bassist Bruno Ravel. There's over 3 hours of conversation to go. If you'd like to be notified as more from this interview is uploaded, hit the subscribe button and click the bell. Weren't you briefly in a version of White Lion?
Oh yeah, that was a learning experience. Yeah.
How so?
Yeah, that was pretty much right after Michael Bolton, maybe a couple of months after. Greg D'Angelo called me and told me that I think the guy's name was Mike Spitz, the bass player.
Dave Spitz, maybe?
Dave Spitz. Mike was the guitar player, right? So that Dave he was either fired or he left, I don't know what, and that, would I want to come and audition? And I remember seeing White Lion in a club version at Lemoore in Queens, which is a big rock club. And I just remember seeing Mike Tramp come out on stage and saying to myself, Jesus Christ, the girls are going to go crazy over this guy. Like he was like David Lee Roth on steroids. Like as far as his whole stage persona. And fortunately and unfortunately, I mean, if you ask me today, I miss that because I miss the real rock star. I miss the guy that you see walking down the street that looks like insane, crazy, and people going home like, oh, holy shit, who is that? Like, you don't see that anymore. Those days are long gone. So, when I saw somebody like Mike Tramp, I'd be like, that's one of those guys. Like this guy's going to be a star. So I remember that. Musically, I didn't remember too much, but I remember Mike Tramp. So when Greg called me about that, I went to audition. And I got that gig, which was great, and was in that band probably for 6 months, and I quit because I realized that it was going to be a dead end for me. Because at one point, I think it was Fight to Survive, the White Lion album, Fight to Survive was already out. And so they were getting ready to go for round 2 and do demos and get label interest and all of that. We were basically just doing club shows. And I remember Greg calling me up saying, Bruno, man, he goes, I know you've played me your songs. You got great songs. You need to show the band your songs. Show Vito and Mike your songs. They're really good. And I would be like, yeah, really? You think that they'd be into me contributing as a songwriter? And Greg was like, yeah, sure. Why don't you do that? So I said, all right, I'll give it a shot. So one day we were at rehearsal. We used to rehearse in the basement of Lemoore in Brooklyn. So that's where their gear was set up. And I remember there was a giant mirror. It was like a long, rectangular, narrow room, very narrow. So the gear was set up against one wall, and then there was literally maybe, I think it was like 10 feet from one side of the room to the other side. And on the other side of the room was a giant mirror. And so Mike Tramp would always yell at me for not banging my head enough. And I would tell him, I would say, I'll do it during the show. I don't want to get a headache. I'm not doing it right now. And he'd be like, Bruno, you're not banging your head enough. You've got to bang your head with his Danish accent. And so we'd have to sit there in front of the mirror and pretend head banging during the set. And I always thought that was ridiculous. But anyway, getting to the point, I remember coming in rehearsal that day, and Vito was sitting in a chair in front of his amp, noodling on the guitar, and I just walked up to him and I said, hey, I know you guys are getting songs together for a new demo, and I just want to let you know that if you want, I got a lot of ideas. Maybe we could get together and I could show you some of the stuff that I wrote. And he was like looking down. I remember he was looking at his guitar, and he stopped playing and he just looked up at me and he said exactly these words. He said, "You're the bass player. Play the bass." And then he looked down back at his guitar and kept playing. At that moment, I just knew, I go, well, this is a dead end for me. If I ever want to, I'm only going to be a bass player in this group and never have it'll never be a true band. So not soon after that, I quit.
Which became an issue for them even later. I know by the time where publishing money rolls in and Mike and Vito are getting rich. And I know those guys had a problem where they were like, hey, we're still paying 25% of the bills, and they got like live show where they split it, but none of the publishing.
It's a very delicate and tricky situation being in a band.
I've always thought with, especially as the albums go on, I mean, a lot of people only have a couple of albums. If you look at even the ones that separate the classic bands, it's usually because they did 3 or 4 classic records.
Right.
And then you see, it kind of fall off, some of the songwriting, to where it's like, man, if it's just those 2 guys, like you need need to get other people involved, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, again, it could go either way. You could either have a really good thing going where, like you're saying, there were two guys writing the songs, or it could be that maybe the other members of the band, maybe they don't come up with anything good. So you never know. Yes. Is it always great to have more ideas? Of course it is, if they're good.
And so were White Lion a big deal in Jersey at that time?
Oh, again, born and raised in New York. I just recently moved to New Jersey, but close
okay.
enough.
Sorry.
They weren't. No, they really weren't. They had a buzz because the band was managed by the club owners of Lemoore in Brooklyn, which was one of the main rock clubs that all the national acts would come through, and all the up and coming acts would play there. So the fact that they were managed by the club owners, and everybody kind of knew who they were, but they were one of those bands that a lot of the bands that came up around that time would start as a cover band, and they would kind of slip an original song in every once in a while. But White Lion never went that way. They were always original. So it was weird. So when White Lion would play, there might not have been big crowds at the beginning because a lot of the kids were like, oh, well, you're not doing covers? I don't want to go see you. So, but over time they kind of generated a following, and then by the time that I was in the band, big crowds, especially in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area.
I knew somewhat. Of course, I knew the story on Twisted Sister, and I'd interviewed one of the guys ages ago, and so even before the documentaries, I kind of knew that they were really big at that time. And then after talking to Steve, I see White Tiger and Prophet and all these bands. Was that considered more a New York thing, or was that a Jersey thing? Because there's a whole big music scene there.
It was basically, they'd call it like the tri-state circuit, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. Bands that were based out of New Jersey, like White Tiger and Prophet, and then their Twisted Sister was based out of New York. And so there were, it wasn't really any rivalry between the states or anything. It was basically like everyone was just fighting for club dates. So but there were I would say a handful of bands that were packing clubs. I mean, like talking 1,000, 1,500 people in a club on a Thursday night. Like it was like way more than now. You see some national acts that draw 200 people. Yeah, I mean, this was like, it was a full-on scene.
I think Twisted Sister could make up to $10,000 a night or something.
Oh yeah, they were making tons of money. Yeah, I'm a huge Twisted Sister fan. Saw them when I was like 13 years old in clubs in Long Island. I saw all those all the bar gigs and all of that. And it's funny, even back then, because I was growing up witnessing all of this, and I remember at one point when, like you mentioned, White Tiger. At one point, I went to this club in Long Island. I was a teenager. I was probably 15 or something, and I saw White Tiger, and the opening band was a band from New Orleans called Winger. And it was Kip Winger and two other guys, and they were doing covers. It is crazy, right?
You said from New Orleans is where they were from?
Yeah, I think it's because I asked, where are these guys from? They're not from here. And there was like a circuit where there were certain bands from other cities that were maybe had such a big following from their local area that they were able to hook up with booking agents to get them in different areas. And Winger was one of them. I think they were based out of New Orleans at the time.
I interviewed Bo. I haven't published it yet, but we talked about Winger and how he was involved from ground zero, basically, of kind of putting that together and then using him and the other Winger brothers on his Kicks albums and shit like that.
I remember I was friends with the Warrant guys, right? So when he was doing Cherry Pie, Bo was doing Cherry Pie, Steve West and myself, we were in Los Angeles at the time. I think we were writing for or just hanging out. I don't know what the hell we were doing in LA, but we were in LA and we were very friendly with the Warrant guys. And I think Eric called. We were hanging out with Eric, and he was like, "Yeah, man, we're in the studio today. Why don't you guys come down and check it out?" So we were like, "Sure." So we came down, and it was actually the day they were recording background vocals for Cherry Pie, and I forget what was the other song we sang on. Maybe Sure Feels Good. Is that on Cherry Pie?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I wouldn't.
I forget. Anyway, but I remember Janie, because we had already toured with Warrant on our first album. Janie was like, yeah, man, come on and do some gang vocals with us. And we were like, okay. So Steve and myself, we actually sang on the song Cherry Pie, swing in all the background vocals we were doing. And I remember we were standing around the mic, like kind of in the crescent, like a semicircle. And I remember we all had the headphones on and we were singing the background vocals. And I remember Bo coming in and saying, hey, man, who's that guy with the really bad New York accent? And I was like, I think it's me. He goes, get closer to the mic. I was like, okay. So it's funny, like when I hear the record, I don't really hear myself in there, but I know I was there.
And then just to clarify, because there was another White Tiger with Mark St. John that I think got a record deal, but there's no relation of the two bands, right?
Yeah, no. The White Tiger that was in the circuit here was, I think the singer's name was Neil, and he was just another guy that I looked at and was like, wow, this guy's going to be a star. He's just like a really great front man, and he actually played the flute, which was crazy. They would cover like Jethro Tull,
right,
and he would come out and twirl the flute like a drumstick, like Tommy Lee twirled a drumstick. He would twirl the flute like that and play all the flute parts on like Jethro Tull songs, and we would all sit there and go, holy shit, look at this fucking guy. This guy's nuts. So yeah, they were great. They were a really good band, good cover band.
And they were big there, right? I mean, they were...
Yeah, bigger in Jersey than on Long Island, but definitely, I remember at the time that I was going into clubs, they were gaining steam, like they were getting bigger and bigger.
And so, any other Vito or Mike Tramp stories?
No, not really. Vito's super talented dude, and, definitely an introvert. And Mike, I'm still friends with to this day. He's a, great guy. And no, it was just a good, again, all these things are learning experiences that got me to where I am now.
Of course.
So,
do you ever hear from or see Vito around, or does anybody
Vito,
ever?
I only hear about things, through the social media and stuff like that. I just hear that he's around, but he's still keeping to himself, and So I haven't seen Vito since I went to visit White Lion at the Meadowlands when they were opening up for was it AC/DC? I think they were on tour with AC/DC.
They were.
Right?
They were, yeah.
Yeah, so I think I went to see them at one of those shows and hung out with them on the bus. That was the last time I saw Vito.